Hey guys, it's Iconic. And with the reveal of the Bloodline Ascendancies, I wanted to go over the most interesting bloodlines for minion builds, the ones that you should be considering when making your own minion builds for 3.27 Keepers of the Flame. Starting off, we have the Catarina. Now, Catarina, I think, is the most interesting Ascendancy for minion builds in general. It has the most nodes, and it's the only bloodline where I can potentially see a universe where you use 6 points out of 6. Or 6 points out of 8 for the Bloodline Ascendancy. The others, they have like 1 or 2 strong nodes, but this one has one really strong node, a second very decent node, and then the last one that's kind of meh, but kind of okay too. So we'll start off with the weakest one, which is Prolonged Servitude. This node has minion increased damage leading up to it, and it says minions deal 15% more damage while they are on low life, and minions cannot be killed but die 6 seconds after being reduced to 1 life. Now there's a few use cases I can see here. A, if you want a cheap Blessed Rebirth, you don't think about having to buy League Stars, you really just want to like save cost. This acts as a better Blessed Rebirth because it has a 6-second delay instead of a 4-second, and it can even be used with Blessed Rebirth to make builds like Summon Skeletons and Vow Summon Skeletons to make sure those minions last a minimum of 10 seconds, which is a long time for something like Vow Summon Skeletons where you do not scale defenses. Now this second part of the node which says the more damage, there aren't too many use cases I can think about off the top of my head where you actively get minions on low life. The best I can think of is maybe you try to force it with Infernal Legion, but there really isn't. I don't think it's worth sacrificing a support gem slot just to have the more damage multiplier. I think it's going to be a situation where you want minions like Skeletons where they can go low, that is fine, and then they just get more damage before they're killed, stuff like that. I think that is the best case scenario. I can't see much past that in terms of use cases. Then for the next in strength, the Death Offering. This has a small node which increases offering duration, and the node says 50% increase effect of offerings, which is a very strong effect. However, offerings kill affected damageable targets when offering duration expires. Now there's 2 ways I can see this working, and the first one, which is what I hope happens, is the way to play around this is to refresh offerings. And because if you keep refreshing offerings, i.e. you do not let the duration expire, then all your minions should be fine. But the downside to that is the moment you forget, there's a lapse in judgment or whatever, you forget, everything is dying, all your minions dead. Now for temporary minions like say Summon Phantasms, Skeletons, stuff like that, it's not a problem if they all die, it's no biggie. But there's a catch to this even on those builds, and that is nodes like Mistress of Suffering, which is over here. Mistress of Suffering makes your offering skills also affect you, and there's the reduced effect, whatever, but the important thing is your offering affects you. This effectively means if you take this node and you take Mistress of Suffering or like Queen's Hunger, which also has a similar effect, and you let your offerings expire, you're dead. -1 portal. It might be rough because you are indeed a damageable target. So this is going to be one of those interesting ones where I see it being used, but I see it being in niche cases or where people actively scale offerings to the point of not caring. Now, I personally have a theory craft I want to go over later on. Maybe not talk too much about it here, but the TLDR is I plan on using Queen's Hunger, which gives you the effects your offerings fully, and it also has your triple offerings, like the 3 different offerings on rotation. And so long as it triggers the offering, you have the effect on your character. Now, why that is going to be good is because if you scale enough duration on offerings and you use Hollow Effigy, which again is right here, which makes your offering skills not require corpse. So you scale enough duration to make it so your offerings do not need a corpse but last 15 seconds. That means you now cannot die to offering lapse or whatever, because the chess piece on its own it has permanent uptime on all 3 buffs. And I already know how you can get that to like 100% uptime even without eating corpses. So like that is going to be a viable playstyle. And then on that setup, 50% increased effect of offerings is huge. And of course, if you pair this with Leash of Oblation, which says you can have an offering of each type, which then allows you to not override Spirit offering with Flesh offering, but rather have all 3 offering types. Or I also believe there's a mod on Queen's Hunger as well that allows you to have 2 different offerings at the same time. If you pair those 2 effects, you now have permanent triple offering, which is a lot of power, and increased effect of those offerings, which is again very huge. So there's going to be, we're going to end up doing stuff like that. We'll end up seeing how it performs. I plan on doing it with Phantasms, but maybe more on that later. And then the final node here is Umbral Army. With Umbral Army, it is important to note that the buffs here are applying to your player character and not your minion. So increase attack cast speed for someone ready, it's for you, not for your minions. But that being said, there are 2 here that I want to particularly bring attention to, which is increased defenses per race Spectre, which is huge because on a pure Spectre build, we are going to be getting 10 to 12 Spectres, which is 120% increased defense to 144, which is a lot of increased defense, whether you're armor, evasion, or armor, ES, evasion, or some hybrid. It is a lot of increased defense on top of your tree. So this is a very strong Ascendancy. This is the no-brainer that most minion builds are going to pick this league. Now, there is a notable mention again in Umbral Army, and that is the 2% increased movement speed per summoned Phantasm. This node, alongside Soul Rests, make it so you can have, I believe, 22 max Phantasms, because the Phantasms from the staff do not share count or max count with the Phantasms from the gem or something like that. So you have 11 from the staff, 11 from the gem, giving you 22. Now, if you pair this with a Dark Monarch, specifically the one for Summoned Phantasm, this effectively means you can have 44 Phantasms. Now remember, this is 2% per Phantasm. So this is going to ease, this one node will then give you 88% increased movement speed, which is a ridiculous amount of movement speed that minion builds just do not have. So I see myself making a build around this and having like a build that can hybrid as a heister and potentially just clear all content is going to be the goal of that setup. But I'll be POBing that later in the week, and we'll see how viable that actually is as an archetype. If you haven't already, do consider liking and subscribing, as it helps the channel out a lot. Next up, we have Farrul Bloodline. Farrul. This one is also interesting, but way more niche. This one has some interesting nodes in the form of, you have this Warcry speed leading up to a node, Primal Roar, which gives you 80% increased damage if you have Warcry recently. Now, for builds that take advantage of Warcries to buff your minions, and there are quite a few of them, this would be very strong, 80% increased damage. It is unfortunate that the increased attack speed per minion only applies to you. So unless you're going for some kind of hybrid setup, this is just basically wasted, especially if you're already using Spiritual Command, which gives your minion attack speed to you. So you already have enough attack speed for like movement skills, as an example. Then the second node has a small node of increased minion damage, but makes you trigger Spectral Tiger on crits. And Spectral Tiger is literally just a minion that gives you increased crit strike chance and attack cast speed. This is not a minion you can scale, I don't believe. It's an Ascendancy skill, so you can't link it. Do not think about making this a main DPS skill. However, if you're doing, again, some kind of hybrid setup, or if you're just doing like a heavy crit strike build or a cast on crit, this might be decent, because it's just, you just keep spawning Spectral Tigers. They will effectively act like Herald of Purity, so you don't even need to scale minion defenses for them, most likely. You just keep critting, and they'll keep refreshing themselves and healing themselves and etc. And you keep getting increased crits and attack cast, so it's also a nice buff. Then the final one, and I think this is the most interesting part about the Farrul, and that is the triple aura setup. Now, this has a node that is very important, and it says maximum number of race specters is 1. Not +1, but is 1. So you cannot have more than 1 race specter. Why do I think this is interesting? Because this is the closest thing to what I would call PoE2 companions, where just by virtue of the specter existing, and they have to be beasts, by the way, as you can see from all the descriptions. just by the Spectre, virtue of the Spectre existing, they have an aura. Now, the left one has the aura that gives increased accuracy, crits, and take no extra damage from crits. Now, it is important to note that minions no longer need accuracy. So if you wanted to use one Spectre and like use that to support a minion build, you would not touch Farric's Will with a 10-foot pole. Just putting that out there. However, for again for a hybrid setup, you want to run an actual DPSing build and you just want to support beast, so to say, you're going to take something like a Guardian Turtle, which is the tankiest, or one of the tankiest beasts that we have available to us. It also provides Determination aura and some extra PDR. You're going to take that, you're going to use that and one of these buffs, and you're going to link it with multiple different supports that help its survivability. So meat shield support, minion life support. You're going to do all of that, and then you also have the second part of all these mods, which is your raised beast specters have 3 additional modifiers that are randomly chosen in each area. This also effectively means that there is a chance you get an even bigger aura buff from your chosen specter. So you might get haste aura. I think there's fizz aura, there's early res aura, there's a bunch of different auras out there that you could potentially get. So this would be interesting, especially because now we're looking at a one specter that has some extra minion life, has increased accuracy, increased crit, and take no extra damage from crit immunity. On top of that, it's giving you Determination aura, 5% PDR, and can potentially give you haste aura, early res aura, maybe I don't know what else, 10 bubble or something. Like there's just certain other auras it has as well. So it's a very packed node, just not for your traditional minion build because it limits your specters to 1. Now, Farric's Will, like we've talked about it all the time, or all this time. So let's look at the other two. Fertile's Presence. This one gives you 100% increased damage and regen 3% of your life per second, and then cannot be stunned. This is also a very strong one. You can take this on a minion build and find success because increased damage is always nice to have. Regen is very comfortable, very, very comfortable. And then we have Farrul's Wild Presence, which I think is the strongest here. And this one gives you a 20% increased attack, cast, and movement aura, which is very akin to Onslaught aura, but Onslaught would stack with this. So if you had to get Onslaught and this one, that is now 40% increased attack, cast, and movement, which is very strong. But the packed portion of this is the second portion, which says prevents action speed from being lowered below the base value. So just by virtue of speccing into this one and having the beast alive, now you cannot be frozen. I don't believe you can be stunned. Anything that would lower your action speed, you can be petrified. So it's very, very strong, especially with T70 modifiers in their current state. So very, very strong if you can pull it off. So I do think there are going to be non-minion builds that use this one, and I am personally thinking about using this for a gimmicky setup with the new Hallowed Monarch helmet, which gives a headhunter buff to a minion, and then using one specter to try to clear your entire map and give him all the buffs from all the rares in the map. So I'm kind of thinking about doing something like that and having him use this extra modifier. It's probably not worth it, and it's probably just worth going for like a typical like 4 specter, 5 specter setup, but we'll see what I end up going anyways. Next up, we have Lycia. Now, Lycia has a bunch of different nodes that just have no correlation to minion builds, but I will cover some of them. In this case, this node has nothing to do with minion builds. It's just converts 50% of all elemental damage to chaos damage, which is maybe some non-minion builds might use it as well as increased chaos damage, but for minion builds, it has no place. Now, this one has a very niche case with a small node of increased curse effect, but a big node of converting consecrated ground you create to profane ground, and profane ground gives you crit chance and increased curses on enemies that are on profane ground. It gives enemies that are on increased crit chance against them. It's important, is an important distinction. If you are on profane ground, you will not have increased crit, but until they step on it. And then the profane ground also inflicts malediction, which is 10% reduced damage dealt and increased damage taken by the enemies, which is a pretty decent buff. And then it also affects you and your allies with chaotic might, which is 30% fizz as extra chaos. Very decent node. I have a hard time justifying getting rid of consecrated ground in practically any setup. But 30% of Fizz's extra chaos is nothing to sneeze at, as well as malediction on top of that. So I do see some setups trying this out, but I don't think it will be a popular node by any means on minion setups at least. Now, the most interesting node here from minion builds is going to be this one, which has a small node of increased effect of Herald buffs on you, but a big node, and this is the interesting part. Herald, it has two parts. Herald skills have 2% more buff effects for every 1% of mana they reserve, which is, you know, that's fine. If you are a non-minion build, you care about this because Herald buff effects actually do matter. But as a minion build, the one that really gets our attention is Herald skills and minions from Herald skills. Emphasis on minions as well. Deal 1% more damage for every 1% of max life those skills reserve. So the way this node would then be used is you would pair your Herald skill of choice with life tap, because that increases the reservation multiplier. Use 6 linkets, so something like Herald of Purity would be a big benefactor of this. Herald of Agony can also use it. And let's just say you're able to reserve even just 50% of your life. That is 50% more damage on a Herald build. Now, you're going to want to get as close to 99% as possible, so you can get 99% more damage, which is huge. And then what you do is you're going to then take it will be a low life setup. So then you're going to go fully ES, and you're going to make sure chaos damage cannot bypass your ES. And you can do this with coruscating elixir, which makes it so, again, chaos damage cannot bypass ES whenever you use the flask. But then you have to scale flask uptime. So you're then going to use items like Tides of Time, which gives you charges to utility flasks. It doesn't matter if it's unique or not. And then you use stuff like something like Brutal Restraint with the Traitor, which again gives you flash charges to get coruscating elixirs uptime to be as good as possible. Or you go Chevron's Wrapping, which does the same thing without you needing to scale any amount of flask charge gain or anything like that. But it does take your chest piece slot and prevents you from going, you know, and whatever else you might have gone like a rare chest piece to really juice your ES. So it's up to you to go the routes that make sense for your setup. But if I had to recommend one, I think the belts would end up being the tankier version, and the chest might end up being the more offensive version. So each their own is what that means. So yeah, very, very interesting node. It's not a free one. You actually have to think about how you play around with it. But I do see myself playing around with it later on in the league, 100%. And then lastly is Aul, the Crystal King. Now this one, well, we're going to talk about this node on the right, which doesn't do anything for minion build because minion builds are socket starved as is, unless maybe you go Wraith Lord, in which case you can easily get the cannot be stunned. Easy, because your helmet now doesn't have sockets, so you have a free cannot be stunned. But other than Wraith Lord builds, we have way too much socket pressure to just give up a chest piece or boots or anything else just for free. So this is not going to be the most used node. Even on its own for non-minion builds, I don't see it as being a popular node. However, this left side I think is interesting. Now the question is it worth 2 ascendancy points? And that is debatable. But what these nodes do is A, they have this lead up to it that is just increased charge duration. But B, for each one of these, you have increased defensive and offensive aura of an element while you have no charge and while you have maximum charge. So for King's Contempt, you have discipline while you have no power charges, and Wrath while you have maximum power charges. And the goal of this is to have both of these up at the same time and to run both auras. So you can achieve this by either running jewels such as Powerlessness or Fragility that give -1 power charge, Endurance charge, and Frenzy charge respectively. And then you run 3 of them, so your maximum is 0. That way you're simultaneously at maximum and at 0. So you'll get both of them at the same time. Or, and this is the worst way to do it, by the way, the next way you can do it is taking advantage of an Eternal Damnation. Eternal Damnation sets all your max charges to 0, and that by doing so allows the same effect. You then have both of them because you're now at no power charge and at maximum. And then the final way is by using a Ralakesh, which makes it so you're counted as having maximum number of your charge of choice, 1 charge in particular. And let's say you went the power charge route. This means even while you have no power charge, you're at 0, you count as having maximum. So then you fulfill this one because it counts as being at maximum, but you really have no power charges. So it then applies both of them. So these are the 3 ways that I can just see this nodes being achieved. And if you're curious, King's Heritage is the same thing for endurance charges, but with determination effect while you have no endurance charge, and then anger while you have maximum endurance charges. And then for King's Might is Grace aura effect while you have no frenzy, and Hatred aura effect while you have maximum frenzy. So yeah, very, very interesting ascendancy, but it's going to be more niche and it has a bit of setup to it. But I do see setups that will essentially push this. Overall, W Ascendancy, I really like it. We'll see how people end up playing around with this. Now, as an honorary mention, even though this was revealed earlier, is the Trialmaster. The Trialmaster, I think, can be used for Val builds, so like think Val Absolution and Val Dominating Blow and stuff like that. Could be a very decent choice as well. This, unlike during Frisia, isn't just a plug and play. You click this and now you have a 100% uptime on something like Val Absolution, because the nodes here are watered down versions of what we had in Frisia. So like the soul gain prevention reduction is just 20% and is not nearly enough to have permanent uptime on Val Absolution, even when paired with the less souls per use and Shepherd of Souls. But that being said, there is a way to get pseudo permanent uptime on Val Absolution, and that is, instead of trying to reduce the soul gain prevention duration, you just ignore that. You ignore this node for the most part, and you focus on getting Shepherd of Souls, which makes it so that your non-aura Val skills require 80% less souls. What this effectively does is you scale duration. So you want your absolution, your Val Absolution, to last anywhere from like a minute to like a minute 30, so that because this is 80% less soul cost, when you fill up your souls, you can cast the skill 5 times. So long as you don't spam it, you can cast it 5 times before you need to gather more souls, which means you can stay in lockout for the entirety of your map if you scale it long enough, and you have pseudo permanent uptime on Val Absolution in that regard. And again, that is the only way you can get pseudo permanent uptime. If you try to go the other way, then you can get it to about, I think it's 18 seconds uptime and like 24 seconds downtime. So you would have like 6 seconds of map clearing without Innocence every single time he despawns, and he'll be despawning every 18 seconds. So it's not going to be very comfortable. So if you want my recommendation, it's to try to really juice duration and just ignore trying to get souls after. And as a side note, if you do go that route and you do not finish your map in those 5 casts, you can leave your map and get back in to just cancel your soul gain prevention window. It's -1 portal, but you don't have to play the map without Innocence, essentially. That about covers the strongest Bloodline Ascendancies for minion setups in 3.27 Keepers of the Flame. In the lead up to the league, I will be updating my Retrifiler guide, so do keep an eye out for that video, as it should be out in the next few days. I'll also be doing a bunch of theory crafting with some of the ideas I discussed in this video on stream over at Twitch and here on YouTube, and I will be making videos discussing any theory craft that ends up looking promising on paper. Now, quick reminder to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and with all that said, thank you for watching.